Welcome to day one of the Imagine Belfast Festival of Ideas and Politics. 130 events happening, loads and loads to do. I'm Alan Meban. I'm delighted that some of you have joined us online for this event today with Rob Hopkins. What better way to start an Imagine Festival than somebody who writes a lot about imagination, writes a lot about transformation. So Rob's an author, co-founder of Transition Network, and lots more that we'll probably discover over the next hour. If you've come across people who ask a lot of what if questions or keep saying yes and, it may be that they've been kind of influenced by his book, which people keep telling me that they've been reading, so I have now joined them. So from what is to what if, and we'll be kind of teasing out some of the ideas and insights in that and see how that applies to Belfast and beyond over the next hour. If you're watching us live, feel free to pop some questions in the YouTube comments. I'll try and pick those up and kind of feed them into the conversation if it works. If you're watching after the event, well, you missed your chance to influence where we were going with it, but I hope it's still an inspiring session. So Rob, you're really welcome to Imagine. Thank you for kind of joining us from, well, you can tell us in a minute where you are, but from a fine library and possibly some LPs in there behind you. But I feel like I could kind of should borrow from the sentiment of the book and ask you to tell us some stories about what the future might be, kind of pique our imagination with what a better world might look like, to kind of use some of your what if thinking, and then we'll come back and discuss why that might be a good idea.
Well, thank you, Alan. Hi, and thanks, and hello, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this amazing festival. I've not been on the same bill as Noam Chomsky before. That's a bit of a landmark for me. So, I spend quite a lot of time in the future, and for me, when I think about the future, I'm not thinking about some utopia from the 2100s. For me, the bit of the future that we need to be really thinking about is about 8, 9, 10 years ahead from now, because we are living in the time of the climate and ecological emergency, which is accelerating at a terrifying pace. And the scientists tell us that we need to bring our carbon footprint per person from an average of about 9 down to about 1 within about the next 10 years. And we need to be seeing massive reductions in CO2 to have any chance, really, of staying below 1.5 degrees. And 1.5 degrees on its own is already pretty terrible. So for me, the climate emergency demands that we reimagine everything. And my philosophy, and since we started the transition movement, our thinking has always been that we will only make that shift to a very different kind of culture, a very different kind of economy, if it feels like a move towards something irresistible and delicious and magnificent, rather than being dragged kicking and screaming away from something that we somehow believe is irreplaceable. So a lot of the work that I do is working with groups and communities and organizations. And I sometimes recently I get brought into organizations as a time travel consultant to do time traveling with groups and with organizations to say, okay, we're going to step out from 2023, we're going to go to 2030, and it's not paradise. We're not talking about utopias. We're also not talking about dystopias, about the worst scenarios that are put out there. We're talking about what that world could be like if we had done everything we possibly could have done between now and then. Because we get so paralyzed with this idea that we have to just move in little incremental little steps and tweak a tax code here and adjust a policy over here. And of course, COVID showed us that was all nonsense, that if we wanted to act boldly and decisively and imaginatively, then we could do that. So I do a lot of work with groups, asking them to travel to 2030. The thing that always interests me the most, and I've done my time machine exercise with thousands of people now. I've done it with 1,500 people in a hall in Belgium a couple of years ago, and with many organizations. What strikes me as so fascinating is that when you do that, actually what you tap into is a lot of the things that we hold in common. So people always say the air smells nicer, the bird song is much louder, people are working less, hours, they have more time for community and friends. People look less stressed. People are doing work that's more meaningful. There's less cars. Nobody ever says, "Oh, we've got a new IKEA which is 4 times bigger than the one we had in 2023," or "My iPhone 27 makes toast," or anything. It's always that. And so for me, I think there's something very powerful, and I take a lot of inspiration from a lot of activists and writers of color in the US, women mainly, from movements there who talk about the power of creating a new North Star for ourselves. That Walida Imarisha, who's an amazing woman who writes a lot about speculative fiction and activism, she said all organizing is science fiction, which I just loved that. It's like all change making is about stories and
Mhm.
telling a more enticing story. So for me, when I think about that 2030, I see a future which is where fossil fuels are something very close to being something that we've moved beyond. We've pretty much electrified our energy system. A lot of the renewables that we've had to put into place are in community ownership, so communities are benefiting from that's been put into place. Um, I think we will have much more sophisticated public transport systems, cycling systems. We will have insulated by then. We won't have done it all, but we will have insulated the majority of homes, so people are much more able to live um, in ways where they aren't generating huge energy bills. And the fact that we're now an almost entirely renewable energy economy means that energy is much cheaper, because at the moment the price of energy is set by the price of gas, not by the
Mhm.
price of renewables. We have a very different kind of a food system. I think it's more localized. We eat more seasonally, we eat more locally, we see food being grown where we are. Our towns and cities are filled with gardens and productive trees, um, and ownership has changed a lot. There was, in the 2020s, we saw a huge concentration of ownership of buildings in the towns and cities where we live. Most of those buildings were owned by distant investment companies. A lot of that shifted, so we see now a lot of buildings being used, a lot of buildings that were used by banks, by big banks, a lot of which collapsed around 2024, and a lot of them were kind of renationalized. A lot of those spaces are used for an incredible diverse array of things that happen there. The thing that, like I said before, that I feel like I spend a lot of time there because I'm doing a couple of projects, one of which is called Field Recordings from the Future. We're working with an amazing musician where I go to visit places that already sound like that future needs to sound like. Because I think, well, if you had the time machine and you could travel to 2030 where that had all happened, and you could record it, and you could bring those recordings back to 2023, they'd be more precious than gold. They would be just so motivating, and wow, really, that's what Belfast's going to sound like in 2030. Well, that's what it'll sound like. So I visited a William Gibson's once said the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. So I've been to neighborhoods in Germany, car-free neighborhoods, 3,000 people, no cars. What would that sound like? I've been to Utrecht to record the bicycle rush hour. 33,000 people cycle into the center of Utrecht every day, and things like that. So, and then I'm working with an artist at the moment to create a comic book around that as well. And a big part of that for me is, if you were then to land into 2030, how does it feel different? And I think the way that closest that I've got to thinking about it at the moment is, it feels a bit like when you go to your first festival. There's like a sense of, it's kind of familiar, but there's loads of stuff that makes you really curious, that's happening all over the place. And the most important thing is that by then there needs to be this fragile but real sense of, I think we might just be able to do this. At the moment, people feel so broken, so exhausted. Any kind of belief that we can really affect change is sort of evaporated. But actually, by then, we need to be in this place of, I think we might actually do this, and I can see the world changing around me, and it feels great, and it's a really exciting thing to be part of. So, in our comic book thing, we have to wear time travelers kind of spacesuits, not to protect them, but not to protect us, but to protect them. So we don't bring our kind of cynicism from
Mhm.
2023. We don't arrive there and do a lot of past splaining to people about how this is never going to work. There's a process happening that's a really exciting to see.
Okay, you have definitely. I think I can see some of the comments kind of coming in on YouTube. Your starting to make people kind of realize how different it would be, how different it would sound and smell, and so on. We'll come back maybe to that kind of practicality of some of that. But let's talk about imagination first and the power of it, because I think what you've just done is to kind of it's to kind of set aside all the normal things that gets knocked out of us as children, isn't it? That you're kind of told, well, be practical, Alan. Rob, that was very interesting, but that was a bit of science fiction you've just written for your homework. But actually, what could you do tomorrow? What's the first step? It always seems more important than the end goal. So, as a society, never mind as an education system, are we afraid of imagination? Is it kind of one of those out of control things that it's hard to control things, or what is it that stops us thinking about better futures so much of the time?
Well, one of the main arguments in the book is that in 2023, when we are faced with an existential challenge that demands that we reimagine everything, our collective imagination muscle, which should be a muscle like this, has become a muscle like this. We've created a sort of perfect storm of conditions that are really profoundly damaging to the human imagination, I think. We know, for example, that the part of the brain our imagination fires from, the hippocampus, is particularly vulnerable to cortisol. So when we are stressed or anxious, it shrinks. And so people with PTSD often have a hippocampus 20% smaller than it would otherwise be. And when that happens, we lose the ability to see the future in positive ways, in different ways. So at a time in the UK where something like a quarter of single mothers are going hungry, so they can't feed their own children, kids are going to school with no food in their lunchbox, the degree of economic precariousness for people means that a lot of people are just in an almost constant state of fight or flight, at the same time as we carry around these highly addictive devices in our pockets that devour time where 25, 30 years ago we might have written a poem or done something imaginative or just gone for a dreamy walk in the forest. Now we have this thing there all the time that's demanding our attention, and I write a lot in the book about that link between attention and imagination. We have an education system that has, even though in the UK the creative sector, what's called the creative economy, is 20% of the economy, bigger than building cars, airplanes, life sciences combined. We still have an economy system, an education system that is driving imagination out. No space for creative writing, for art, for theatre, for all of these things are being driven out of our education system. So by devaluing the imagination and by giving very few times for it to be expressed, then I think we're creating a really, really dangerous situation. And I interviewed a woman called Dr. Marjorie Taylor, who interviews kids between 3 and 5 about to assess how active their imaginations are. She's done it for 30 years. She said, I haven't seen any decline. It's between now and then, it's pretty
So the
steady.
capability is there, but not the
It's
practice.
there. But then there's something happens to kids when they reach 5 or 6 and the imagination starts to really tank. And I think that thing is called school. And then from then on, I talk to people now working in universities who say that young people, because they have to borrow so much money to go to university, because there's so much pressure on them to get a first, that sort of debating culture that the imagination thrives on, young people are much less interested in doing that than they might have been before. I wrote the book because I felt like the human imagination is vitally important. It's the result of everything else kind of being in good health somehow, and but that just slightly out of view at a place where nobody's really looking. Our collective imagination is sort of contracting and desiccating, and that's really important. I wanted to put it back on the middle of the table and go, what happens to a culture if it loses its imaginative capacity? It makes us much more vulnerable to fascists, to a kind of extremist governments. It makes us much more easy to control and to manipulate. It puts us much more in a route where the future as it's presented to us as this is where we're going, we don't feel we can challenge that or think beyond that. So it's fundamentally an important thing, I think.
Are you surprised that governments? I mean, given how often elections come around in Northern Ireland, we're particularly blessed with probably more elections than average, maybe more elections than healthy sometimes. But I mean, manifestos and things kind of cry out for imaginative ideas. If you think of some American presidents in the past having a single kind of mission statement of here's a big, hairy, audacious goal that we want to achieve, imagination has often played a strong part in political leadership of saying, for good or bad, here's what we want to achieve. Are you surprised that the political classes don't seem to kind of encourage imagination more, or is it that they do it themselves, but they then want to keep the power and don't want everybody else to feel free to organise on a community basis? We'll maybe talk a bit about some of the transition network stuff in a minute, but that they want to have all the ideas and keep control of them, and then just let everybody else support them. Is there a power imbalance in where creativity is in the kind of the?
I mean, I think that imagination is often something that people in positions of power feel quite deeply threatened by. It's a good reason why in fascist countries it's all the imaginative people get rounded up first, the poets and the playwrights, and Ursula Le Guin did a lot of thinking about this, and she was very. It's quite useful, I think, to just define terms, because so imagination and creativity and innovation are often terms that are used completely interchangeably, and I think it's really important to tease them apart, because um, creativity is really the application of imagination to create something that can be profited from, and innovation even more so. It's like it's innovation doesn't do any questioning of the fundamental model. It's very much the rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic kind of an approach. The way I always like to explain it to people is like pizza, right? So you don't need to reimagine pizza. That would be ridiculous. Pizzas, we all understand pizza. We like pizza. So it's about how do you innovate with pizza with maybe different toppings or different cheeses or different kinds of flour. Neoliberal growth-based economics is not like pizza, because it's driving us off the cliff at such speed that really the only thing that is appropriate is to fundamentally reimagine many aspects of it. And Ursula Le Guin said something like, creativity is, as a term, has been harnessed by capitalism to a point where it hardly means anything anymore, and I refuse to use it. She said, but they can't have imagination. That's ours. That belongs to us. That kind of radical imagination comes from what, for me, in my experience, and we'll come on to talk about transition. But
Mm.
my experience is that happens with the serendipities that happen when you get people in a room together and you facilitate it really well, and then you start to tap into imagination. It's something that when you create the conditions for people to do it together, it's an incredibly powerful thing.
So tell us a bit about Transition Network and maybe specifically kind of Transition Town Totnes. Totnes, I've no idea how to say it. A small place far away in Dorset. Tell us a bit about that and what it looks like for the community there, and what it's kind of achieving. And it's a long-term thing as far as I can see. It's not something that happens overnight. It's a kind of a gradual process of kind of building more and more people in. But give us a bit of a flavour for what a community in transition can start to achieve or feel or do.
So it's in Devon, just to be
I'm
clear,
sorry, Devon, not Dorset. Oh,
for
begins
anybody
with D.
planning a
That was
visit.
close.
So we started in 2005, 2006, really as a kind of an inquiry, really. Like there was a group of us who'd had our kind of climate change dark night of the soul, and I always say to people, if you're not regularly kind of terrified about climate change, you're probably not paying attention. And actually, to have that, so it was a group of us who'd had that, and we're like, okay, we don't see any cavalry coming riding to the rescue. So what can we do as a community where we are, with the people that we have and the resources that we have and the energy that we have? So that was really the spark, and it started with us showing films and holding meetings and organizing different things that happened. And then it just started. We did an event in September 2006. We called it the official unleashing of Transition Town Totnes. And then that led to the formation of lots of groups who were working on different projects. Very quickly, we had people then from all over the place who got in touch saying, what is it? What are you doing? How do we do that? And we had to say, well, we don't really quite know what we're doing. We're just making something up here that we're hoping might work here. Within about a year, we had to start an organization called Transition Network to support it because there was so much interest, and there's now transition groups in 50 countries around the world, in thousands of places. And I like to think of it as a network of stories. Really, it's people just trying where they are and sharing things that work and things that don't work. And it's a fascinating thing to be part of and to observe. So in terms of Totnes, I think,
I mean,
there has to be,
what's changed in the last 20
yeah.
years in Totnes because of people bothering to imagine new ways?
So we now have a community energy company called the Totnes Renewable Energy Society that has installed lots of renewables around the town in community ownership, funded by community investment.
Mhm.
We have two projects that are very close now to building homes for local people based on local need in community ownership, community land trust models. So realizing the need for truly affordable housing in a town with a housing crisis. There's an amazing project called Food and Community, which gathers food from a big local organic food distributor, food that's not quite perfect or close to its date or whatever, and then they distribute that to people in food poverty, and they do lots of work around
Mhm.
food. There's lots of people who've moved here and started businesses because they're inspired by the wider story of what's happening in the town. So there's all sorts of different food businesses here, food growers, community-owned farms. Uh, we had a local currency called the Totnes Pound
Mhm.
until 2019, which had a £21 note, people would say, "Why do you have a £21 note?" And we could say, "Well, why not?" But actually, what's lovely, even though the Totnes Pound doesn't exist anymore, basically because nobody was using cash of any type
Ah,
anymore, um, that model, because there was a French film called Tomorrow that I was in holding a 21 Totnes pound note. There's now something like 82 local currencies across France that were inspired by that, and lots of them have these crazy different denominations. Like in Liège, they have a 0 note, and I went somewhere that has a 13 note, and I love that kind of playfulness.
what could
Uh,
you do with your Totnes pound? What could you do with what could you trade for a £21 note?
you could spend it in the majority of the shops in the town would accept it as being worth £21.
Gosh.
And it was a really delightful experience to go shopping in the town where you live with your own money, with the town's money. We had a 1, 5, 10, £21 note. And yeah, the majority of shops you'd want to go in, like not the chains, but most of the independent shops
Mhm.
would accept it. And then the idea was that they would then pass them on to people, and you would create this money would circulate more in the local economy. And actually, I was in Belgium recently, and in a town called Charleroi that has a local currency there, and part of the local council's strategy for bouncing back from COVID was to buy €2 million worth of the local currency and distribute them to local people, so that people would then step up and back the local economy, because that's where the resilience came from. And I was in Grand Avignon, which is in the south of France, where they have a local currency called La Roue, and the municipality again used it as a key plank in their kind of bounce back from COVID sort of strategy.
So it's kind of like playing
So
a massive Monopoly game, but in the one area, because the currency is trapped in Totnes, in your case, or in some of these other places. So the money and the value of it can only really be spent with local suppliers or local trades or local. It's a very local currency, isn't it? That's
yeah,
the
so
value. It forces you to buy local or to trade local.
Yeah, so the idea is really that one of the problems that we have as local communities, whether we're in Belfast or Derry or wherever, is that at the moment money comes into that economy from all kinds of different places,
Mhm.
pensions and wages and government money or whatever. Most of it just leaves. If you shop in a supermarket, you shop on Amazon, you pay your energy bills, that money is gone,
Mhm.
and its potential to make amazing things happen in the place where you live has completely disappeared. What we want money to do is to circulate as many times as possible in that local economy before it then leaves. So it's why the Bristol pound, which was one of the biggest, most ambitious experiments here, had written on their notes in very tiny writing, it said, "Keeping money out of the Cayman Islands since 2012." It's like, you can't take a Totnes pound or a Bristol pound to Bermuda or something.
Yeah.
It only has value in Totnes. You take it to Newton Abbot or to Plymouth, it's just a piece of paper. And the model in France, they've adapted even further. We're working with this really kind of enlightened bank, where the money that you then, like every time you buy that currency into circulation, if I swap £100 for 100 Totnes pounds, then that bank then issues that money in low interest loans to local businesses. So there's a double win. You get that money gets to stay locally, and it also then gets to drive other things happening in the town. So it's you can do transition, you can do
Mhm.
localization work without a local currency, but it's a really lovely, playful tool for getting people thinking in a very different way. Like, why do we need our own money? It's also an
Mhm.
amazing story. When we started the Totnes Pound, it got the most news coverage we ever had for anything, because we were the first place to do it, and people all around the world were going, "What? Like you're what? You're printing your own money?" And I still treasure a newspaper clipping somebody sent me from a newspaper in Mexico that had a map of England, Scotland, and Wales, and it had London, Liverpool, and Totnes with only three places that were marked on the map.
You put Totnes on the map. One of
Yeah.
the, I mean, reading in the book some of the stories that are kind of told, there's a lot of information about Totnes in there. But what comes across is that the people, when they're interviewed or when they're talking to you, yes, they tell the stories of changes that have happened and new innovations and ideas that are there. But most of all, they use the word community. It's kind of like a celebration of the fact that they've come together as a small place and they're doing stuff together. So the benefit, the well-being kind of bump in all of this is the fact that actually people know each other. They're relying on each other. They're working together and collaborating. That seems to be one of the beautiful byproducts of it. It's not just that they're not just eco warriors or trying to fix climate change or trying to build community. It's community is at the heart of it. Is that's true, isn't it? That I'm not just kind of making that up. That's
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of it. We live in a time which sociologists call an epidemic of loneliness. They say
yeah.
we've seen huge levels of loneliness and isolation, um, and so we need to challenge that, because that's just toxic, and it's just been awful for people. So what I find is when I visit places, I remember going to one place, and this guy said to me, "Well, even if our transition group ends tomorrow," he said, "I know 200 people I didn't know before." There was one transition group in London where the wife, where one of the members went missing, and because the transition group had spent um, like 4 or 5 years up until that point building and building and building these networks and relationships, they were able to do this sort of campaign to try and find him in an incredibly short
Mhm.
period of time. It's a thing that I see again and again in many different places. It's the I think it's the thing that's almost kind of counterintuitive sometimes to people who come from a much more kind of very adversarial political activism sort of background, is that we always have to make it really clear, if you're doing transition at the community scale, you absolutely have to leave any party political hats outside. This what you're trying to do is a process of building resilience in that local economy, which feels inclusive to everybody and that everybody can see themselves in. So in Totnes, for example, I've been part of some really ambitious community projects to do all sorts of things, and I've worked with people who were conservatives. I voted with people who I'm sure voted Brexit. They didn't quite admit it, but I think they probably did. But we have to keep reminding people all the time, because it's very easy for people to say, "Oh, transition, it's kind of an environmental thing, so it's all Green Party people."
Yeah.
It's like, no, no, no. We've had people from across the spectrum who get involved, and because when you do that kind of community activism, you have there's so much more. I always use the term surface area. It's like it's not a single issue campaign like Greenpeace. We're trying to do this. It's like we're transition. We do food projects. The food projects do tree planting schemes. They do this. They
Mm.
do that. They go out. They do gleaning projects
But
in
you've
the
got
field.
energy on the go, which is a
There's
very different kind of set of
Yeah, then
things.
then we've got energy projects, and then we've got energy conservation projects. And so actually, even so, for people who are really motivated and concerned about climate change, there's things they can get involved in. But also for some people who just like to go and plant trees, you don't have to completely sign up
Yeah.
to climate science to go along and plant some trees, or help give out food to people on low incomes, or do whatever. So designing what, as in permaculture we would call edge, it's like designing that kind of more surface area to it, I think makes it more inclusive. And some of the transition groups as well that we see, who are doing amazing work around social justice and inclusion in what they're doing, and really not just relying on, well, we'll put up a poster and we'll just see who comes, but really actively going out and inviting people to be part of what they're doing, and going to where people are at with with projects that are really about addressing what are the very obvious needs for people, has been something we've seen much more of in recent years as well.
Suppose two things in the back of that. One, is it exhausting for the kind of the profits of all of this to kind of keep going, because it's a lot of energy to put into overcome the inertia that we all have about change or about the fact that things could be done differently. So is that exhausting? You're clearly one of the prophets of all of this, a prophet of transition, if I could label you. I mean, is that an exhausting thing, or is it great fun and you're always surprised by how much energy everybody else has?
I'd say it's kind of a mixture of the two. I mean, there's definitely times that are quite exhausting. It's not. Sometimes people imagine that we're all kind of just giddily optimistic all the time. I
Yeah.
think anybody who feels optimistic all the time is really not paying attention, and anyone who feels pessimistic all the time, I feel like that's a luxury we don't have at this point. Pessimism is kind of quite can be quite paralyzing. So, but I guess so. Paul Hawken, who's a very well-known environmental writer and activist, the way he answers that is he said, if you've spent any time, if you read the climate science and you're not a pessimist, then you haven't read it properly. Go back and read it again. But if you've spent any time among the movements around the world who are trying to do something about it, and
Hmm.
that doesn't make you optimistic, then you don't have a heart. That's kind of where I sit with it. Peter Kalmus, who's an amazing climate scientist and an activist, he said, he was asked what gave him hope, and he said the fact that we've barely tried yet. And that's what really kind of underpins my stuff. It's like we can't say, oh, there's no point doing anything. We've hardly done any of it.
Yeah.
Like when people ask me what the future is like, all of those things that I was talking about at the beginning, they all exist somewhere. I'm piecing together an amazing community project that I saw in Rotterdam that took over an empty supermarket, turned it into an amazing, vibrant food court regeneration project. The cycling infrastructure of Utrecht, the car-free neighborhoods of Freiburg, the tree boulevards of Barcelona, the economic model that they're using in Preston in the north of England. All of this stuff exists somewhere. We're not waiting for someone to create some kind of a silver bullet. What we need to do is to create. The poet Rilke once said, "The future must enter into you a long time before it happens," and that's the bit I think that we forget all too often in activism around climate. It's like if we're just guilt tripping people and talking about extinction and
Hmm.
collapse all the time, we have to create something for people to run towards, and that's the bit that I think where the storytelling and the imagination piece is so vitally important to this. There's a I've been doing a lot of reading and work recently for a project I'm doing next about Sun Ra, who was an amazing jazz musician in the 1960s and 70s. Who he once said, "We've tried the possible and it failed. Now it's time to try the impossible." And I think that's what's really underpinning a lot of what I do now.
So you're evangelizing about people asking what if, starting to imagine what the future would be. Does there come a point, though, inevitably, where, I mean, if you've got some land, you can start an allotment, you can grow some food, you can get people involved. There's things that you can do on your own. But does there often come a point, and it's kind of one of the questions online here has come in, that you basically need political support, or can you do most of this kind of guerrilla outside of the kind of political world, where those kind of traditional gatekeepers of process and bylaws and all the things? So how soon do you reach a scale, even in Totnes, where actually the local council or local government or central government actually really has to give a bit of a nod to what you're going
Yeah.
to do?
I mean, ultimately, of course, we need political support. I'm not for a moment saying all of the stuff that we need to do to address the climate crisis can be done by
Yeah.
communities, because that's clearly not true, and I wouldn't want to put that kind of pressure on them. But what I've seen time and again is that when communities come together around an idea and they don't wait for permission and they just get on with it, that's one of the ways that we shift politics, is because w- we just we create a new normal. We create something like, so one of my favorite examples is in Liège in Belgium, former industrial city. um, sort of seen as a bit of not that great a place by other places in Belgium. And in 2014, the local transition group Liège en Transition, they came up with an idea. They came up with a what if question. They said, what if in a generation's time, the majority of food eaten in Liège came from the land closest to Liège? And they called it the Liège Food Belt. And it was a small group of really enthusiastic, committed people, and this was what they wanted to do. They had no input from the local council. The local council thought they were a bit mad, and it was never going to go anywhere. 3 years later, by which time they've raised 5 million euros of investment from local people in the city. They've started 27 new co-ops. The municipality go to them and say, this is great, this. Uh, how can we help? Just tell us what all the blockages are and we'll remove the blockages. Really quite enlightened leadership. So one of the things that the municipality did was to say, look, we own loads of land around the city. We're gonna map it all, test it all for contamination and its orientation, and make it all available at low rent for people who want to start food production projects as part of this
Hmm.
model. The mayor of the city who I met, he said, we used to say we wanted to be a smart city, now we want to be a transition city. So it's now the model that the municipality is using to reimagine how it procures food for its schools, its universities, its hospitals. It's a model that has now spread to 6 other cities in Belgium, Namur and Charleroi. It's spreading into France as well. But it started with a community group just doing that. So just before Christmas, the mayor of Liège made me an honorary citizen of Liège because he said before this, everybody thought Liège was a bit rubbish. And actually, now you go around the world telling everybody about how great Liège is. So you're kind of an ambassador for our city. But it started with a group of people, like many people who are listening to this call, who live in a city, who love the city, who have an idea for how it could be changed, and who just got on with it. And actually, after a while, the municipality's role was to come in and say, how can we help? How can we support? And that feels like one very powerful and very much as yet untapped route to ambitious change to me.
Imagine Belfast have been running a kind of Forgotten Spaces project as part of this year's festival, where there's normally something kind of that runs through it. And beforehand, they were asking people to kind of basically identify derelict land spaces that have become kind of caught up in development hell and nothing's actually happening on, and to kind of suggest what's the potential for actually using those spaces. And if you want to look on the imaginebelfast.com website, you'll find the link for Forgotten Spaces, and you'll see a list of places around the city which people have actually said, well, this isn't being used, but it could be used for this.
Mm.
And so Wednesday evening, 7:30, how to regenerate forgotten spaces. There's a discussion in Europa Hotel, and there's still a few tickets left for that if people want to go and see the results of the competition, but also hear from some local folk who are actually trying to figure out how to unburden the bureaucracy of actually doing those spaces and regenerating places. And there's some stuff in Scotland as well, I think I've come across, where you can, if something has laid idle for so many years, then you can go to the council and they will basically kind of free it up, and you can actually use that space for a community project and actually start to, because a lot of projects do require somewhere to do it. If you want to grow something, you want to build something, or you want to get people to meet, space is really, it's one of the things you require, not just imagination, but then somewhere to meet. Isn't that right?
Yeah, and I mean, one of the projects that I've been involved with for many years here in Totnes is called Atmos Totnes, which is a community-led, where the community becoming its own developer
Mm-hmm.
on an old 8-acre abandoned factory site. And one of the and we're in a big sort of push at the moment to get our local council to use its compulsory purchase powers to buy the site to enable the project to go ahead. And one of the things that's come out of that was we used a power that the Westminster government created a few years ago in about 2011, that was called a community right to build order, that said, as a community, if you could identify a brownfield site, they saw it as an innovative way to unlock brownfield sites.
Mm-hmm.
If you can identify a brownfield site and you can run a community consultation on what should happen there, and then you can master plan it, and then you run a referendum, and more than 50% of people in that referendum vote for that to go ahead, then you can do your project, and that is your planning consent. What they didn't design into it was then that you had a right to buy, like they have in Scotland.
Yeah.
So we did all that work, and then the owner sold it to a private company. So we're now trying to get it back. But I think one of the really transformative powers that governments could give to local communities would be that if you do that, so if you identify a brownfield site or any site in a city, and you do a consultation and you create a master plan for what you want to do, and you can then get it past a referendum of local people, that then you acquire the power of compulsory purchase. So you would then acquire the power to bring that site into community ownership, because that then becomes a really interesting
Mm.
power, because it means that we can move away from big companies having a site, having a factory, deciding to, for economic reasons, to shut it down, and then it's the community who worked in that factory for years who then has to sit with this increasingly dangerous thing falling
Yeah.
down around them rather than unlocking it. So I think we need some, you know, all of this work that communities are doing is fantastic, but there's a lot that government could do in terms of policy making to come in behind it and to
Yeah.
really support it
And
and
to
to
make
allow
it
it to move a
to
lot
increase the
faster.
permanency of some of these
Yeah.
projects, that actually it's not just, yes, it's not just successful and somebody realizes you've proved the value of my land by actually having a bit of activity around here, I'll sell it,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is
Because
counterproductive.
there's a real danger otherwise that actually a lot of the stuff that transition does just becomes another form of gentrification, and you get some nice projects and it pushes up the land value. We have to be putting in place ways that we can secure truly affordable housing so that people can stay in those
Hmm.
communities and participate in it. And it's one of, I think, the big shifts in transition over the years has been to say this needs to be creating work for people. It should be in Belfast, for example, in 10 years' time, the biggest source of new employment is coming from the Green New Deal, from the kind of stuff that transition
Hmm.
projects are doing, from building a new kind of economy there, which is rooted in community ownership and more participatory democracy and different models of investment. That's what the future needs to look like, really.
Tell us a bit about Jason Roberts and Better Blocks. It was kind of he was based in Dallas, wasn't he? And he and a group, I guess, came up with a kind of a guerrilla transformation of a block or an area. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's kind of done in spite of bylaws, in spite of local government, just
Yeah.
people kind of doing something and then saying, "Do you want to come and get us for this?" Not that
Yeah, it's
not
lovely.
that
Yeah.
Imagine Festival is suggesting people should do anything criminal or that breaks the law, but on the other hand, there's a room for actually just going ahead and doing things and seeing what happens.
Yeah, there's some quite interesting gray areas in
Yeah,
which we could operate, I think we might say.
yes.
So Jason lives in Houston, Texas, and Houston is a city that is where there's lots of areas that have just been destroyed by bylaws and bad planning and bad design. And so he set up a project called Better Block, and what they would do is they would go to kind of intersections or places that were public places that nobody really cared about, and they would design in their workshop a whole load of things that they could arrive overnight and assemble and just put up this sort of new area with food stalls and all sorts of different things that were then part of it. It's what I like to call a pop-up tomorrow. It's something that
Instant gentrification.
yeah, like it gives people a taste of a different future and how it could be. And but what they would then do is, and they would paint cycle lanes and they would put trees and they would make this space nobody cared about a place that people really cared about. There's a one of my favorite TED talk is by a guy called James Howard Kunstler, and it's about bad design. It's hilarious as well. The point he makes in there is if we keep designing places that nobody cares about, then we end up with a society where nobody cares, and that's really really dangerous. And so, but what they would do is that they would then create this space, put on a big party, invite everybody from the local council, but then they would print out all of the bylaws that they had broken in order to create it and put them on the walls, so that when the local council people would come and say, "Oh, this is so great," they would say, "Well, it would be a hell of a lot
I'm not
easier if you
allowed to be
changed
here.
this and this and this and this and this." And yeah, I think one of the examples that I come back to again of this idea of a kind of pop up tomorrow, take a space that people know really well, but use it to give people a taste of how the future could be, was in April 2019 in London on Waterloo Bridge, when Extinction
Mm.
Rebellion closed Waterloo Bridge for 2 weeks and they turned it into a forest. They put trees all down the bridge, beautiful trees. And I've spoken to 3 people so far, and I'm sure there were many more who worked somewhere there and crossed that bridge every day to go to work, normally just traffic going past, and who said that they stopped on that bridge and they went, "Oh, why can't it always be like this?" And then gave up their job, and then are now involved in kind of sustainability stuff. It really impressed on me the power of creating those kind of pop-up tomorrows, giving people a
Mm.
taste of a different kind of a future, because you're not going to find that in the newspapers. You're rarely going to find it on telly. You know, we need to give people. You can only be as imaginative. It's the interesting thing about I talked about the hippocampus earlier.
Hmm.
The hippocampus is where your imagination and your memory both fire from. And in many ways, when you're being imaginative, what you're doing is going to the kind of storage cupboards of your memory and looking through and assembling things you've got in there. And when you put two things together, that's what imagination is, basically. And so you can only be as imaginative when you're thinking about, well, what would a really radically low carbon, more socially just, more equal,
Mm.
more community owned, much more biodiverse Belfast be like and smell like and taste like, if you've seen things in other places, if you've heard stories from other places, if so it's one of the things I always recommend, and I'll do it today, is to say, really um, honor and value your imagination in terms of its need for those stories. You'll find them through the transition movement. You'll find them through We Are Possible. You'll find them through Positive News magazine. You'll find them in lots of different places. But you kind of owe it to yourself to update to fill your cupboards with possibilities,
Hmm.
because it makes it so much easier when it comes to doing that imagining work.
There's a question here. Let's kind of make it more international for a second. I think it's Luigi has kind of put in a question about what role do developing countries have in kind of using some of this. It's not just the UK or Ireland that actually needs to transform its imagination, transform how it's operating over the next kind of 10 years, but everywhere in the world. Do these kind of techniques apply everywhere? Because a lot of your examples are coming from kind of Western Europe. And I guess that those are places that you can travel to. You gave up flying some years ago, so the places that you can get to by boat and train and so on. So you're kind of constrained by where you can get to. But what about the developing world? I mean, some of this could apply there the same.
I think so. When we started the transition movement, we were really inspired by something called contraction and convergence, which is a climate model created by somebody whose name Aubrey Mayer. It was
Hmm.
created by a guy called Aubrey Mayer. The idea with that was, if you imagine the global north is up here and needs to come down to here, there's like a sustainable level here whereby the world can work in a sustainable way. And then the global south, many places in the global south are below that line and need to come up to meet that line. But the work that is most important, I think, over the next sort of 10 years is this bit.
Hmm.
That actually the model, because we're in the global north, it's this bit that's really important, and how we create the story where we're not being dragged away from something irreplaceable. We're feeling drawn towards something incredible. So we really designed the transition movement as a kind of a detox for the affluent global north,
Right.
really, if you like. And in the global south, there are many other movements like Via Campesina, Buen Vivir, kind of indigenous
Hmm.
movements, which are very deeply rooted in the imagination, actually, and which are kind of better designed for those places. I mean, it's always interesting to me that there's active transition movements in most parts of South America, a couple of little bits of Africa, a lot of it in South Korea and Japan, not much in China. So it's kind of it's distributed in kind of different places, but I don't feel like it's for us to come up with a model
Mm.
for the global south, because actually the global south is taking the brunt of of with the way we live in the global north. So the moral debt, the moral duty is on us to shift what we do, and to model and tell a different story about what progress is, about what wealth is, about what living a good life is. um, and so yeah, so that's really been the focus in what we do. But certainly I'm also really fascinated that in terms of this kind of thinking about how important it is to tell different stories about the future, how our activism should be underpinned by imagination. The people who inspire me most in that tend to be women of color in the US, and the prison abolition movement and different movements like that, who've spent a lot of time already thinking about this kind of stuff.
We've got about 12 minutes left, so I want to talk about energy quickly, and then maybe we'll go on to food as a thing. If you're watching live, feel free to put some questions into YouTube. I'm going to pick up Liz yours in a minute. Yes, lots of that. Um, I'm I'm kind of reminded of I got a phone call about 2 years ago on a Saturday afternoon saying, "Could you film an event in Dublin tomorrow?" Kind of short notice. The president's coming and we need to record it. And it was kind of a celebration of a community project that they'd built a wind turbine. They decided to basically do their own community energy production. And what was fascinating, kind of sitting behind the cameras, kind of doing it, was the local energy, the amount of inertia that they had to overcome to do it. Because the local energy companies all said, we'll build you a wind turbine. They said, no, but we kind of want to put one up because we want to own it. They said, oh no, but it'd be far better, but we'll give you kind of a cheap rate of energy. And they said, no, but we'd like to sell the energy to you, because the whole purpose was that they wanted to have the community ownership, but they also wanted the profit of it to be spent on all kinds of projects. And so they were already, so they kind of, for 6 months they built allotments, and then for 6 months they're going to do something with education, and the 6 months they're going to do. And so it was a kind of a way of getting sustainable investment in their area, all by sacrificing a big field and putting a turbine in it. But it took it took years, and it took a lot of very dedicated legal stuff to actually finally get through to the fact that they could own a wind turbine, even though they weren't a power company, but they practically had to become one. So the details of that are somewhere online. But I mean, Totnes has kind of done something similar, I guess, that you've invested in energy production on the basis that it's good for the local for local people to see it and do it, but also there's probably a bit of kickback as well in terms of you get more than the Totnes pound to spend if it happens to be windy or it happens to be sunny.
Yeah, I mean, I think this notion of community energy is really, really important idea, and there's a transition group in Wales, in Fishguard, who borrowed from local people the money to buy a 50% stake in a wind turbine that was put up, and then over the last 6 or 7 years they've paid back what they borrowed, and so they now own 50% of this windmill, which generates about £50,000 for them every year as a community, to then invest in projects that they want to invest in. And it's one of the, we were talking earlier about how the existing powers that be can either put in place things to really allow this kind of approach to flourish, or they can just put in loads of things that block it. And around 2012, 2013, there was a real growth in community energy projects. The government created what was called the Community Energy Strategy. It was the first time we'd had one. It was a government policy document about how do we really enable community energy to take off. And then David Cameron came in, and overnight they changed so we saw loads and loads of communities who were doing this model of raising investment from local people, putting in place solar energy projects on local schools, churches, community buildings, whatever, people's houses, and then using the feed-in tariff to pay off what they borrowed, so that they then had an income stream. It was a brilliant model, because it meant that we could see a route to transition groups, community development organizations being self-funding in a relatively short period of time. And then the Tories came in, and overnight they just they cut the feed-in tariff so hard that most of those projects died. There are still some really big ambitious ones that are happening in Bristol and Bath and in London and different places, but they're not quite as accessible as they were before. So I think there is something really important, that as people who live in a place, rather than putting our money in the bank, we put our money into investing it into community energy projects that still give us a return, but that are putting in place that infrastructure. But it needs the legal model in place to enable that to happen,
Yeah.
which is a matter of political will. And certainly in Westminster, when your government is very much in the pocket of oil and gas companies, it makes it much, much harder for that to be possible.
Yeah, and those are also kind of schemes that, from a Northern Ireland perspective, energy may be one of those probably devolved things. So what happens in England, we might get some financial benefit if there was money being given out, but we don't get the actual policy here unless it's implemented by our executive, who may or may not be sitting at any particular time. So that may also hold us back. So we've had local energy, local food. So are you a proponent of we should be kind of growing vegetables, fruit and vegetables, kind of up the side of roads, and you should pick an apple on the way to the bus or on the way to work? Is local food production key to the future? Because if we started this conversation it was a kind of imagination that was somewhat driven by a climate emergency and a climate crisis, and needing to kind of take steps to kind of fix that. So, when it comes to food production, do you think that should be a much more local thing or solely local?
Yes, I do. I don't think solely local. I don't think we're ever going to get to a position and I'm not talking about self-sufficiency,
Mm,
but at the moment, our very low level um, of meeting our own food needs is a real vulnerability. It makes us, we've seen with the war in Ukraine how it's been pushing up food prices. Climate change and running out. I mean, whether we should be eating tomatoes in February is really another conversation. But
mm,
the recent crisis with that, my sense is that every step that we can take towards building a more resilient and more local and kind of intentional and designed and thought about food system, um, then the more we, the better. There's no downside to it. There's a town I visited in France called Montsartou, where the municipality bought land that was going to be developed for executive housing. They used their power of compulsory purchase. They bought it. They created a market garden, which now produces 70% of all the food for all the schools in Montsartou, and which is amazing enough on its own. And all the food is cooked in the schools. The kids go out
mm,
to the garden. They're involved in growing it. They're then involved in cooking it. They've created a whole new food culture in that school. What was really fascinating was then they did a load of follow-up research, which showed that 60% of families who before never bought local organic produce had started doing it as a result of the culture shift within the school.
mm,
So so I feel like, and as well, I think when we live closer and we can see where our food is being grown and we know the people who are growing it, then there's more accountability there.
mm.
They're not going to spray it with whatever, they're not going to put whatever, because they have to, they have to
Yeah.
know the people. So for me, it's when we talk about localization in the transition movement, it's not saying we have to localize everything and we shouldn't import anything at all, but we should start with the things that make sense. So we should, the more food we can produce locally and build more of a culture of local seasonal food has benefits to everybody, I think.
Okay.
So food, energy, and increasingly, I think building materials. If we can start to be looking towards building really energy efficient houses using local straw, local hemp, local lime, local clay, local timber, again, we start to create an economy where money is circulating more rather than just leaving.
I want to kind of bring in Liz Batten has asked a question about imagination and donut economics, and the whether there's a link between those two. Do you want to have a go at explaining what donut economics are?
Oh God.
I was just thinking, or do you want me to read it off my screen here?
No, I can have a go if you
You,
like.
you
So
have a
it's
go, but I suppose, is there any crossover between what we can do with imagination and donut economics?
yes.
There's our question to finish with.
Okay, so for me, so donut economics is a model created by a phenomenal woman called Kate Rayworth, which she describes as economics for the 21st century, which is based on the idea that if you imagine um, a circle that where we can't push outwards into the planetary boundaries. We're constrained in one way by the planetary boundaries, so we can't put more CO2 into the atmosphere. We can't put more whatever. The planetary boundaries we can't push beyond. And then in the middle, there are the things that we also can't push into, the kind of social things, like people need to be able to heat their houses and to be fed and have meaningful work, and it identifies what she calls the donut, which is this kind of sweet spot that we need to operate in. And her book sets it out beautifully, and her trainings and her workshops are fantastic. It's a very powerful tool being used by communities and local governments across Europe. What I love about it, and I've seen it again and again in workshops that they do, is that one of the things that I learned best from researching the book was the imagination needs limits. If you just say, if I said, Alan, tell me a story, that's really quite tricky, right? Where do you start? If I said, tell me a story about the mouse that lives behind under the piano behind you, who has a blue hat, and I put limits around it, it's why when you study improv, you get given those kind of things, those limits that
Mhm.
allow you to be really imaginative. What I've seen again and again is when business people or local politicians come into a donut economics workshop and it defines that sweet spot and says, okay, so you can't go that way and you can't go that way. This is what we have to operate in. Then then that's what we have to work with. So I know Rob Shorter, who who works for Donut Economics Action Lab at the moment. He and I work closely on some of the imagination stuff. Kate's very inspired by what I do, and I'm very inspired by what she does. And I think we need tools like Donut Economics, which are able to help us put the right limits in place in a really creative way that then allow us to do the kind of thinking that we need to do
Mm.
and
I,
ask the right questions.
I think that's a great answer to what was a great question. If you want to find out if Rob Hopkins has been new to you today, and you want to find out a bit more from what is to what if, I think I recommend it in a very impartial way, because it certainly made me think, and there's some lovely examples in it that just kind of go, oh, never thought you could do that, or never thought of that would have that effect. So it's kind of, it does fire off your imagination, if anything else. If you want to find out a bit more about food and food production and where we are with that, I'm back tomorrow at 4 o'clock with George Monbiot, who I discover lives down the road from Rob. So it's kind of like we're kind of circling around one small area of England for some experts. But we'll be talking about Regenesis and his thoughts on how to feed the world without devouring the planet. That's online at 4 o'clock tomorrow. Most of the events in Imagine Festival are in real life. If you want to find out, if you want to hear some local politicians from the 5 largest parties recite their favourite poems and then talk about the value of arts within politics, 8 o'clock tonight at the Crescent Arts Centre. Still some tickets left for that. Don't just imagine what it would be like. Come along and see. But Rob, a big thank you for joining us on day 1 of Imagine. Thanks for your time this lunchtime. Thank you for your stories and your enthusiasm, and best wishes for Transition Network as you bring it to new places and come up with new quirky ways of actually kind of trying to fix life. And do things differently. And for everybody else, have a great first week of the festival, or first day of the festival, and come back and see more before Sunday when it all finishes. But Rob, for today, and to the audience with your questions and your participation, many thanks and all the best.